Let me officially welcome everyone, right? So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining and welcome to our Salesforce Developer User Group event. Today we will discuss about the Winter 22 updates presented by Alva. I think she doesn't need any introduction, but just to uh, to do it for a formality perspective, I know, of course, all of you know her, but she is a Salesforce developer evangelist. She has been Salesforce MVP for a very long time. She is helping the community. I met her in the Dream Ole event. She has been participating to that, and she's doing much more things in the Salesforce community. So thank you very much, Alva. And with that note, I'll pass it to you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for introducing me. And of course, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very glad to participate in this group. Indeed, one of my last activities that I was going to do in 2019 before COVID was going to Amsterdam, not to the developer group, but we were organizing the Amsterdam World Tour there, and I had the flight and everything, and I missed that opportunity. And I'm super glad that you invited me, and I hope that we are able to meet in person very soon. So, today I'm going to talk about Winter 22 highlights for developers. What I'm going to do is to try to combine some announcements that have been done at Dreamforce that are really part of Winter 22 because they are being released or in this release, or they are being announced as a beta or pilot feature, and also other features from Winter 22 that I demoed some of them at Release Readiness Live for developers, but I'm not going to focus on those, and I'm going to try to focus in the ones I haven't demo, so that you can watch the videos for the already demoed features and find some new interesting stuff today. These are my contact details. I'm from Spain. I'm based in Granada, in the south of Spain, as you can see per my accent. And if you don't have my Twitter account or a way to contact me, I'm very active on Twitter. I respond to emails if you want to ask me something by email. I'm going to be glad to answer. And of course, you can contact me on LinkedIn. Great. So our favorite slide, forward-looking statement slide. I love when I need to present this, but we need to do it because I'm going to do some forward-looking statements. I'm going to talk about some beta features and some pilot features, which means that they may not make it to GA, especially that has happened in the past with pilots. But for beta, it's more real. Normally, beta features make it to GA. What happens is that they change from time to time according to customer feedback, and maybe I'm talking about a specific implementation that is working in the beta phase, and we finally change that because we realize that it's better implementing the feature in another way. But this just means that you shouldn't make purchases of Salesforce stock based on the functionality that is not generally available, which is the production phase, right? Production ready phase. So today I'm going to try to cover several announcements that have been done. I'm going to divide them by topic, and I'm going to start talking about Lightning components, right? Because it's also Lightning web components and Aura components for some of the features. So what do we have in this release for Lightning components? I'm going to start from features that are generally available. I have the status for all the features here. And then I'm going to talk about beta features and then about pilot features. So it's not in the order of most interesting features for me, but in the order of what's GA, what you can use as of today, and what do you need to enroll in a beta or in a pilot, right? So first of all, something that has been released in Winter 22 is a module that is going to allow you to build components to manage cookie consent status. This module only works for Experience Cloud at the moment, and I'm not going to demo this because there is a really great demo in the video of release reading slide for developers, Stefan Chalder Garcia, my teammate, talked about this topic in depth and responded some questions on the Q&A. But basically is this, right? You are going to be able to import some functions from a module that are going to allow you to implement a Lightning Web Component like this one here. Indeed, this is interesting because Stefan did created a package for App Exchange, which is cookie consent, before this feature existed, and now he's going to be able to adapt that package to use this module. It's a handy feature, right? By the way, if you have questions during the talk and you want to stop me, do it. I'm okay with that, right? I can stop and talk about specific question. Then something else that we have GA, it's the ability to see the dependencies tree for your Lightning components. Now, if you go to the setup menu, Lightning Web Components, you are going to be able to see there which dependencies that your component has, same as we had like for Apex classes or Apex triggers and so on. Now we are going to be able to see that for Lightning components. Not super interesting, but I'm sure that it's going to help some developers with their day-to-day work, right? So what else do we have for Lightning components? We have a feature in Developer Preview that you may have heard of, but it's unknown to some developers, and I think it's going to be a really interesting feature, right? This feature is Light DOM, and this feature does work for Lightning Web Components open source, right, outside of the platform. It doesn't work for Lightning Web Components on the platform yet. And with this feature, what we're going to be able to do is to select that we don't want to use a shadow DOM for our Lightning Web Components. This is desirable in some cases. For instance, if you are using a CSS framework that doesn't work with shadow DOM and you need to take a look at the internals of the DOM of your components and the shadow DOM implementation doesn't work for you, then you can activate this Light DOM feature very easily. The only thing that you have to do is to define in the JavaScript file of your component that the render mode is going to be light instead of shadow, right? And then in the template that you want to make it open, not open but light, I mean we are going to have like the regular DOM, not the shadow DOM one, you have to indicate a directive which is LWC render mode light. As I told you, this is going to help with CSS theming. It's going to help with third-party tooling and testing. Sometimes we need to use user testing library that needs to take a look into the internals of our components, and we are not able to use that library for testing or for basically for testing, right? We are not able to use that because we have shadow DOM there. And we are giving you the possibility to use those libraries when Lightning Web Components run outside of the platform. And finally, this is going to be helpful also for accessibility. Why? Because some screen readers are not able to work well with shadow DOM when shadow DOM is on, and those screen readers are going to be able to read the DOM properties correctly when we activate this feature, Light DOM. As I told you, this is in Developer Preview. I'm going to show you the documentation for that. I'm going to open it here. It's documented in the documentation for Lightning Web Components open source, right? And you have a couple of examples. And this was also demoed in the developer keynote at Dreamforce. I'm going to leave you, after each section, I'm going to leave you some links, and those links are the links in which you can watch the demos that I'm not going to repeat, right? I'm going to do new demos for things that haven't been demoed yet. By the way, if you write questions on the chat window, I can also see it, okay? What else? We have another, the other one, Lightdown was developer preview, but we have a beta in Winter 22, which is Lightning Web Security. And this one I think is super interesting, and that is going to solve problems, day-to-day problems that many developers are having with Lightning Web Components, and in the future with Aura components, right? So what's Lightning Web Security? Lightning Web Security is basically the new generation of Locker, right? It's a new client-side architecture that has been created in a way in which we obtain the same security benefits that we had with Locker, with Lightning Locker, but we have less restrictions, right? And to explain that, I'm going to show you some content that I have found on Stack Exchange that are basically questions complaining about restrictions that Lightning Locker had, and I'm going to show you some examples with Lightning Web Security activated of how we can overcome those restrictions thanks to this more modern architecture, right? So for instance, I found this question: not being able to reference a package custom Lightning Web Components from other Lightning Web Components outside the package. So basically, with Lightning Locker, if you were trying to use Lightning Web Components that belonged to another namespace, for instance, an ISV, that was not possible, right, with Lightning Locker. However, with Lightning Web Security, we are going to be able to do that, right? And I have an example here. There is a problem. There is a problem because I haven't had activated the new Lightning Web Security client-side architecture. So I'm going to show you here. I'm trying to use, I have a component which is cross namespace, and basically I'm trying to use a Lightning Web component that I have installed from a package in the App Exchange. I'm trying to use that component in this page, and I'm getting an error, right? I'm getting an error because Lightning Web Security is not activated. My Lightning Web Components are using Lightning Locker, and this kind of usage is not allowed, right? So what happens when I activate Lightning Web Security? I'm going to do that in the setup menu. This is something that you can do as well as of today in a Winter 22. You go to Session Settings, and there is a setting which is, I'm going to make it bigger, use Lightning Web Security Beta for Lightning Web Components, okay? For now, it's going to work only for Lightning Web Components, but in the future, it's in the roadmap that we make it work with Aura as well. So now I have activated Lightning Web Security, and I'm able to use a component that lives in a different namespace, right? This is because the Lightning Web Security implementation, it's different from the one we did for Lightning Locker. The Lightning Web Security implementation uses something called JavaScript sandboxes that virtualizes the execution environment for your Lightning Web Components and makes it possible to have like a runtime environment that it's secure, in which we can expose, in which we can have access to global objects like window, document, etc., and in which we can work as if it was like the full big runtime environment without local web security, right? JavaScript sandboxes is the concept. So that is one of the problems that Lightning Web Security solves. There is something else, which is that if you remember, for Lightning locker, let me open the documentation. We don't use with Lightning Locker the real window, document, and element objects. We use 3 objects which are a secure version of them that we created for Lightning Locker: secure window, secure document, and secure element. This implies some restrictions. For instance, some of the APIs that are secure from these objects are not supported simply because we didn't add the support. Also, some third-party libraries that need to work with some APIs of these objects are not able to run within a Lightning Web Component because of that. And now we are removing all that. We are going to be able to use the real window, document, and element objects. We are going to replace insecure APIs, the ones that we consider insecure because they open the door to cross-site scripting. We are going to replace them or to remove them from those objects, but you are going to be able to work with the real window, document, and element object, with the difference that they are going to be attached to your JavaScript sandbox and to your namespace, so that there is no risk that other components are able to break into your component data. So I have found another question on the Stack Exchange that it was again a problem, a restriction with Lightning Locker. They have hit an error that says RTC PR connection is not a constructor in LWC. And effectively, if we take a look at the APIs that are supported, I think is this one, right? RTC PR connection is not supported because we are not supporting that API on secure window. But now with Lightning Web Security, well, I have already activated it, right? Because I created a component, is this one here, in which I'm trying to instantiate that API. And when Lightning Web Security was deactivated, this was firing an error. However, now I'm able to log this. I know it's not a fancy example. I'm just trying to show to you that I'm able to access this API as if I was in the regular DOM environment, right? But I'm able to do it, not like before, in which I was getting this error saying RTC PR connection is not a constructor. Indeed, I can go back to that to Lightning Locker, and we can see that we are getting that error. Let me do that. Let me edit the page. And again, here I'm getting an error. Well, this error is from the cross namespace reference, but I'm going to remove this error from the page. I'm going to go back, and we are going to see, I think it's an error that appears, yeah, here. RTC PR connection is not a constructor. So as you can see, now it's going to be much easier to get the same security benefits while having less restriction. This is a beta. It's there for you to test and to help us as well. We are looking for feedback. If you take a look at the documentation for Lightning Web Security, if you look for Lightning Web Security, you are going to find the documentation in the release notes, and there is a group on the Trailblazer community in which we ask you to provide feedback. Okay, if you have feedback of something that's not working as you expect, or anything that you think that could be improved, that is going to be super helpful for us. Do you have questions about Lightning Web Security?
No question as such, but this is very nice feature because now we can use this manage package LWC components. That's the best thing. We can also create our unlock packages and move things around. So that will be a nice thing.
Yeah, it's going to be great for reusability. In the company I was working for, before joining Salesforce, we wanted to do like package of UI components, and we couldn't do it because of this, and now that is going to be possible. And also it's going to let you use third-party libraries that before were not supported because of these secure windows, secure documents, and so on, and now they are going to be supported. So it's going to provide flexibility.
Yeah, that's nice thing.
Great. So this was the last beta feature for Lightning Components.
Regarding that light DOM, is it only available for OSS, or is it available for both normal LWC and?
Yeah, for now it's only available for OSS. I'm not sure if it's on the roadmap to be on the platform as well, and that's something that I can ask because I'm not sure.
Okay.
Great. So that was all regarding beta features for Lightning Components, and there is a new feature that is a pilot that, well, it's a pilot in a sense, right? Because it's a pilot if you use it outside of the context of Experience Cloud, but the name must be familiar to you, because we have been using Lightning Web Runtime to support Experience Cloud for a year now. So Experience Cloud sites are powered by Lightning Web Runtime. This is LWR. But what we are piloting now is the ability to use Lightning Web Runtime outside of the platform to power your own static sites or your own single page applications. Right? So think about it as a huge evolution of Lightning Web Components open source, in which you are going to have a way to configure all the modules, services, and dependencies that you need to build a modern JavaScript application as of today. So with Lightning Web Runtime, what we provide is, well, first of all, a system for creating templates, for creating your pages or your static sites. We provide also middleware for routing, for being able to navigate from one page to another page in your static site. And the applications that you build with Lightning Web Runtime, you are going to be able to deploy them on a variety of runtime environments. For instance, if you want to create an application and run it on Heroku, you are going to be able to scaffold the app following the Lightning Web Runtime wizard. This is going to include all the dependencies that you need to build your app and all those functionalities, and then you are going to be able to deploy your application to Heroku as you did with Lightning Web Components open source, but in a much more advanced way, right? Or for instance, you are going to be able to run those applications locally, the runtime environment of your choice, right? This is available as an NPM package. The idea, we have released it for having early testing and feedback, same as with Lightning Web Security, and we would love if you can take a look at it and tell us what you think. I'm going to open the site, because there is where you have the instructions of how to scaffold an application, right? Here in Get Started, if you want to get your hands on, they explain to you that to create a project, the only thing that you need to do is to execute npm init LWR. This is going to start a wizard similar to create a LWC app in Lightning Web Components open source, and there you are going to be able to decide some features of your app, some features that you expect it to have, and then a basic site with all these scaffolded files and folders and so on. It's going to be created and you can start customizing it from there. For your information, the whole developer site, the whole new developer site has been built with Lightning Web Runtime. Lightning Web Runtime is under the scenes of the new Salesforce developer site. And of course, this is a pilot, but bear in mind that for Experience Cloud, it's really GA. We have been using it to power Experience Cloud site for a year now. So take a look, let us know what you think, and we will be again very grateful to have your feedback. Great, and another pilot regarding Lightning components, this time Lightning component testing. This pilot, I think it's super interesting, is called UTAM. I'm going to open the documentation page as well. By the way, I'm going to share the slides so that you have all the links later on. So UTAM stands for UI Test Automation Model, right? And this is a framework to help you write end-to-end tests for your Lightning pages, decoupling your test from the DOM structure that gets rendered under the scenes. And you are going to understand that much better with an example. So if you go here to guide, here you have all the documentation, and in Get Started, you can find the tutorials. In the tutorials, everything is super well explained. There is a playground, and the tutorials are like a step-by-step tutorial that you need to read and follow and try to modify the code to see it in action. And what we get with this UTAM framework is that, imagine that, for example, we have a component which is called Hello World, okay, this component here. And I want to create an end-to-end test to test the behavior of my component. What most developers, test developers, are facing as of today is that they write a test and then suddenly the DOM changes because Salesforce has changed the internal implementation of a Lightning Web Component, or because a developer that has created a custom code for a component has changed the internal implementation. That's perfectly fine. Things need to change. But trying to fix the test all the times that they break, if you have 2,000 tests, right, it's going to be super expensive for your developers and for your QA engineers and your organization in general. So what we try to do with UTAM is to decouple the DOM implementation for the test from the test, so that we don't have to fix the test. We just have to fix the mapping that exists between the DOM and what the test is going to test. So for instance, imagine that we have this example here. So with this UTAM file, is a JSON file, what I'm trying to do is to define that I know that my component has an element which I'm going to name world, because this is the element that I'm going to want to test. And I'm saying that at this point, the way to obtain this element is using a selector that selects by world class, right? This would be like the way to retrieve this span as of today, right? Then, instead of writing my test to query the DOM and have this dependency with the structure that my DOM has, I just say that I want to obtain the element. Well, sorry, here, I just want to obtain the element which name is world. I'm mapping the element, but the name I define here, and the get world, it's get plus the name of the element that I want to obtain. what happens with this is that if in a later moment I change the implementation of my component, the only thing that I need to change is the way in which I'm defining the selector here. I don't need to change my 10 tests that are trying to query that element from the DOM. It's going to be much easier because the tests are going to be decoupled from the DOM structure. Hope that it makes sense. Here you have lots of examples. This is just the hello world one, but as I told you, if you follow here the tutorial, you are going to learn a ton from this. And we are using already this framework internally, and we are piloting it externally, but you can start using it because it's available from the documentation page that I leave you here in the slide deck. You have questions? Okay. Have you had problems with end-to-end testing, like with Selenium and this kind of frameworks? Capybara, I remember we used Capybara in my previous company, and we spent hours and hours and hours trying to fix Capybara tests because they broke all the time. Well, if you can take a look at those pilots, because they are really interesting. I told you that for the GA features, I haven't done a demo because there is a demo in the Dreamforce LWC episode for LWR and for Light DOM, and for cookie consent and that's it. We have everything very well explained in a blog for Lightning Web Components in Winter 22, and also in the Release Readiness Live for Developers video that I will share at the end of the presentation. Great! So that's all for Lightning Components. What about Apex? We have some new things for Apex. Again, I prepared some demos for Apex for Release Readiness Live, so I'm not going to demo today the features that are generally available, but you can find the recording. I will share the link later. I'm going to briefly talk about them. First of all, we have the Enum.valueOf method. It's a method that is going to help you get the value of an enum by its string value. So for instance, if this enum value string contains winter, then this string value of is going to be to return the instance winter from the enum class, right? It's not going to save your life, but it's going to make your code cleaner and quicker to run, right? And to write. Then we have the ability to use mock responses to test functions. Functions have become generally available. In this was announced yesterday. Yes, it was yesterday. I don't know if you have seen the announcement. And for functions to be generally available, we needed the ability to test them in Apex. And to test a function in Apex, think about it, it needs to work like an HTTP callout. Like in the same way that you use mocks to mock an HTTP callout, we needed to provide a class, a mock class, that helps you mock the function invocation, so that your tests for Apex don't depend on the function invocation, right? We have provided a mock that you can use to test asynchronous invocation and also synchronous invocation, and it's going to work in a way pretty similar to any other to any of the other mocking utilities that we have in Apex. Okay, again, this is demoed fully in the Release Readiness Live video.
Is this functions available in free developer account as well for learning purpose?
Okay, so functions has been made GA, but
that was yesterday.
yesterday, exactly. But to get access to them, you will have you are going to have two options. One option is to wait a couple of days, because in a couple of days we are going to release trial orgs that you can request to play with functions. And the other option is to talk with your account executive so that you get a courtesy license to try out your functions in your production and sandbox orgs. Those are the two options. They are not available on developer orgs as of today.
Trial org also is not available for us as of now.
In a couple of days.
I saw it in and Salesforce documentation. It was written that it will be available in near future, not now.
Yeah, but it's going to be shortly.
Okay.
You can talk. The other option is talk to your account executive and try to get a courtesy license.
Okay.
Yeah. So, well, so that was for testing functions, and there is something else that is in developer preview. To activate it, for instance, if you want to try it, what you can do is to create a scratcher, and there is a property that you can set up in your scratcher configuration file so that the feature is available in your scratcher. And with this feature, in Apex, we are going to be able to invoke invocable actions from Apex. You are going to be able to invoke standard actions. For instance, here we are invoking an action to create a chatter post. And you are going to be able to invoke custom actions that have been defined in Apex, or if you have a custom action that you have installed from an external provider, for instance, you don't need to have access to the code to be able to execute it. Again, this is something that I demoed at Release Readiness Live, okay, if you are interested in watching a demo. And for Apex, there are two really interesting pilots. They are closed pilots. This means that you need to talk to your account executive, or I believe with your technical account manager, to be able to play with them. But I think that they are going to make it to the beta stage very soon, and that we will be able to play with them without having to do that step, right? One of them, super interesting, regarding to security. At the moment, you know that checking for security, CRUD, FLS, and sharing in Apex is sometimes a bit painful, because there are like different methods that you can use, and we are releasing more and more functionality each time, but it's still painful for some developers. For instance, I think it was super great when we released the with security enforced clause for SOQL queries, because that simplified the process very much. But with this pilot, it's going to be even easier, because what we are doing is to include a new parameter in the database.query methods, search.query methods, and database DML methods to define if we want to execute the operation in user mode. This is enforcing CRUD, FLS, and sharing for the current user. This is going to enforce security very easily for you, and it's going to be much easier to implement in code, and it's going to be much less verbose, right? And there is another great pilot that will allow you to execute DataWeave scripts from Apex. If you don't know DataWeave is the language that we have in MuleSoft that helps you to transform data from one format to another format very easily, right? And at the moment, this is something that At the moment, this is something that we just use in MuleSoft. This is a playground to play with the DataWeave language. But that DataWeave language is very effective for performing transformation, and we want to give you the opportunity to use it in your organization to transform data and to execute it from Apex. So the idea is that you will be able to create a DWRL script, which is the DataWeave language script, push it to your organization, and then from Apex be able to execute the screen with the records or the data that you want to transform. Again, this is demoed in a chapter for Dreamforce, which was the Apex chapter. I don't remember the name right now, but I have it here. Let me open it. Oh, I need to log in and everything, so I'm not going to open it. But if you navigate to this URL here, you are going to arrive to the Apex chapter in Dreamforce, and you are going to see demos of those two pilots, the user mode database operations and the DataWeave in Apex pilot. Okay? I also leave you here the Winter 22 Apex blog. It's a blog post I wrote, and in that blog post I also talk about the GA features like invocable action from Apex, use mock responses for functions, and the Enum.valueOf method. Great. Questions about Apex? Thank you, Paul. I know that you are there. Thank you so much for listening. Okay, no questions. Well, and we arrived to the hot topic, the hottest topic from today and yesterday, which is functions, right? Functions has made it finally to GA. We announced that yesterday. As I mentioned, this is not available in developer orgs, but we are going to have it available in a special kind of trial orgs. This is just because of how the infrastructure is set up under the scenes. And well, what we are going to have with functions is the ability to write a piece of code in a different language that is not Apex. For now, Node and Java are supported, and I think the next language in the row is Python. We are working on Python right now. And you are going to be able to write functions in those languages, and those functions are going to run in a new infrastructure that is inside of the Salesforce trusted boundary, but that is a new infrastructure that auto-scales the resources when that's needed. This means that if you have a function that has many requests, because today is Black Friday and we are receiving too many requests in our Salesforce organization, and we need to execute the function many times, and we need to scale that, the platform is going to automatically scale the resources that are needed up or down depending on the needs of the requests, right? That's going to happen. And another benefit is that if in Salesforce core, let's call it Salesforce core, we have some limits in regards to long processing requests. For instance, when we need to perform an intensive calculation that needs to process a big number of records and needs to take a lot of CPU time, sometimes we may hit the limit. With functions, that is not going to happen because we have the function running in this new infrastructure that has been designed for that. This is going to be fully integrated with the rest of the features of the platform. I'm going to explain that in the following slide, right? So basically, we are going to have the functions space, and I'm going to tell you the technologies with which it has been built in a second. So there is where we are going to run our functions, and we are going to be able to invoke those functions from low-code tools and also from pro-code tools. Basically, we are going to be able to invoke them from Apex. As of today, we are able to create invocable Apex to invoke those functions that can be called from Process Builder or from Flow, right? And we are able to invoke the function through Lightning Web Components through Apex as of today. I think in the future we will draw a line from Lightning Web Components from to function, but this is like completely forward looking because that's what I believe that's going to happen. Then what happens when your function is running, that is running in this new space, that it's being auto-scaled, it's serverless, and all those great features that the function execution is going to have, I'm going to be able to query data from Salesforce or to update records in Salesforce thanks to an SDK, right? That SDK is going to be provided in the body of the function, and we are going to be able to use it. I'm going to show you a function in a second. What's under function? I think this is interesting to know, and that's why I include this slide. So basically, for functions, obviously we have created some custom functionality, but we are also using some very well-known open source technologies. We are using Kubernetes, right, for the containerization of the applications and the auto-scaling of the functions. We are using cloud-native build packs. Build packs are used to be able to execute functions that are written in different languages in the runtime. So this is the library that we use to be able to execute Node functions or Java functions, and we will use it to execute Python functions in the future. And we use or we follow, better said, a standard called cloud events to communicate the functions. So when you want to invoke a function from Apex, basically what we are doing is to fire an event, like a platform event, right? But it's a different kind of event. And that event follows a standard called cloud event, which is great because you know that following standards helps us better integrating our technologies with any other technology out there and have the best developers that already know those standards to work with us, right? Let me show you the demo, and then I will tell you the resources. So basically, I'm going to close this. I'm not going to deploy the function and so on, because you have seen lots of demos of functions being deployed, and if not, you can go to Dreamforce and take a look at the main keynote, right? But I'm going to try to focus on what a function can do and how to implement it, right? So this is the code for function recipes. It's a new sample app that we have released to help you understand the use cases for functions and how to write them. We have a couple of examples that are written both in Java and JavaScript so that you can see the anatomy of a function in both languages. And for instance, I'm going to talk about this one, process large data. So here we have a document with data in JSON. It's a document that occupies more than 6 megabytes, and if you try to read this document and perform, or this data and perform some calculation in Apex, there are high chances that you are going to reach the CPU time limit, right? So instead of doing that, what we can do is to have that data in an external database, for instance, although here we have it in a simple JSON file, and we can create a function to process that data, right? The use case in this function is I want to, these are places for which I'm giving the latitude and longitude, right? Like in high school, I think are education places like high schools and universities and so on. So I want to give the function some entry parameters that are going to be the latitude I am and the longitude I am. I'm going to specify the number of results that I want to obtain, and the function is going to compare my latitude and longitude with the one of these places, and it's going to return to me the 5 closest places in the sample data. Okay, that is what the function is going to do. So basically here, what we do is to read the function here, read the JSON file here to have the sample data, And then each time that the function executes, we are going to process that data to perform that calculation and calculate the distance. What is important here? Well, the way to define the function, this is a Node.js function, is this one. We define an async function in JavaScript. It makes sense that it is async because normally those functions are going to be invoked asynchronously, although you can invoke them synchronously, and they are going to execute, and you are going to pass them a callback that is going to execute once the function finishes, right? And the function is going to receive three parameters. The first one is going to be the event. The event represents the cloud event that we saw before that launched the function or that fired the function, and it's going to contain the payload if you pass a payload to that function invocation. The second parameter is going to be the context. The context is like the glue that matches the function with the Salesforce OR. Is where we are going to have access to the information of who was the user who executed the function, who was the OR ID, or which was the OR ID in which the function was executed. And it's going to give me access to the SDK. That SDK is going to let me perform SOQL queries on the OR, or update records or delete records with DML on the OR. It's like the way in which I have the connection with the organization. And then we have a third parameter, which is the logger, in which we are going to be able to log information so that we are able to see those logs in Salesforce, right? So basically here we are performing those calculations, that algorithm, and that's it, right? And the function is returning like the most, the closest places on the data. I'm going to show you this function in action in a second. I'm going to show you also the Java implementation. If we take a look at the Java implementation, is this one, sorry. It's like a much more strongly typed language, right? So the code is more verbose, but it's going to sound much more familiar to you if you are normally used to write Apex code, right? We need to define a class to define the function, and we need to override the apply method. This apply method is going to receive the event and the context. For the logger, we obtain a log4j instance, same as you do in regular Java code, right? And the event and context parameters are going to have the same meaning than with the Node.js implementation. The event will bring me like the payload of the event and the information about the invocation, and the context is going to be the link to my Salesforce OR. And this is the implementation with Java. This is public, this is published in GitHub, and you can take a look at it later. So to work with functions, let me go back to my browser. To work with functions, this is not functions, sorry, this is not functions either. Let me close things. Functions here. We have all the documentation already available, right? What you will have to do is like to set up your developer environment, you need to install the last version of the Salesforce CLI, because that last version contains two executables. Contains the regular SFDX executable and also a new executable that is the Unified CLI. The Unified CLI is a new version of SFDX that we are releasing called SF, that is going to work with Heroku, with functions, and with Salesforce, so that we can have everything under the same CLI and you don't have to keep changing the CLI or installing different CLIs in your machine, right? So for now, for this version, we have the functionality to work with functions under this executable, and here in the documentation you are going to find all the commands that you can use from the SF executable to work with functions. For instance, if you want to generate a function, for instance, if you want to test a function locally, for instance, if you want to deploy the function to your organization, right? And that's mainly it. What's happening behind the scenes is that when you deploy the function to your organization, you are deploying the function to a compute environment, right? That is linked to your organization, and this compute environment is elastic, is the one in which functions are going to auto-scale when running. So here I have, let me log in Major again, because force or open, I was logged out. Come on, come on. Yeah, so here, if I go to the setup menu, this is what you are going to get into your trial orgs if you are able to get one, or if you get a license, a courtesy license for for your production or sandbox orgs. Okay, so here we can see that I have Salesforce functions enabled. I'm connected to a compute environment in which I have been able to deploy function recipes, right? And function recipes, I have them here. And these are the basic recipes that you can use. For instance, this is the one that we saw before, that is written in JavaScript and also in Java. You can take a look at the code from here just for simplicity, and you can run the function. In this case, for instance, I'm going to specify a latitude and a longitude, and I'm going to say that I want 10 results back, and this is running the function under the scenes in my compute environment, and then I get the results back, right? The way in which you can invoke the functions is from Apex. I haven't shown that, but let me show it to you. So this is going to be here, right, in my code for Salesforce. This class. Okay, so what we are going to do, for instance, if we want to invoke that function, we are going to use the function name, right? And the name of the project. We need to define a project for your organization functions implementation. Then we call invoke. We can pass in a payload, and then we process the status. This is the synchronous invocation, and we can also invoke it asynchronously. I don't know if we have an example here. Okay, I think we don't have an example. But basically what happens when you invoke it asynchronously is that you pass in here a callback, and that callback is going to be automatically executed when the function finishes its work, right? So here in function recipes, you have also some implementation examples that are like more real use cases in which you would use those function recipes. For instance, going back to the process layer data volumes examples that we have seen, here we have a lining component that takes your current latitude and longitude and calculates the 5 nearest places that are part of this data that we saw here in the JSON file, right? And this is all the function what is calculating that and doing that, right? Questions about functions?
Yes, I have one question.
Yeah.
Like, will there be any timeout thing, or will there be any API limits here? Any such thing?
Yeah, so I know that there are going to be limits because obviously running a function has a cost, and that cost needs to be under certain limits. But I also know that those limits are going to be much higher than the ones that the Salesforce, not the Salesforce platform, but that an organization can provide. Because in the organization, you know that you are very constrained by the Salesforce limits, and for functions, it's going to be different. I think that for querying back to Salesforce, the standard API limits have been relaxed for functions, I believe, because it's true that if you are executing a function many times and you need that function to constantly perform SOQL queries, then maybe the 24-hour API limit is going to be reached soon. So I know that I believe that that limit is relaxed if you are calling out to Salesforce from function, if that makes sense.
Okay, thanks for that.
But
And regarding, please.
yeah, but better double check the documentation, and I will try to answer that question more concisely as well, and write in your group a page.
Okay, thanks. And regarding usage of it, I think it's pay-per-use model, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yeah, it's going to be pay per use.
So if I'm not using today, let's say, and so there will be no charges. It's like that. On the other contrary, if I'm using a lot, then I have to pay more.
I'm not sure about the details of the pricing, so I cannot tell you 100% sure, but I think it's going to be that way. Like, if you don't have functions activated, of course you are not going to pay for that, and then you are going to pay like for having the feature activated and then per use, same as Salesforce normally does, right?
Thanks.
Thank you. More questions?
Not from my side. Until we get the trial, until we do the hands-on.
Okay, so we have released some content to help you get started with functions apart from the guide. You have also function recipes, which is the app that are just shown, and there are two trailhead badges. There is one which is a quick log over Salesforce functions, and the other one is a quick start for the function recipe sample app. Those were released yesterday as well, so you can take a look at there. Great. And I'm going to continue with the last section, in which I'm going to talk about platform developer tools. This is going to be very briefly, because most of these features you know them, but I think it was interesting to mention them just in case someone doesn't haven't seen them yet for whatever reason. Yes, and one of the features that was released for winter, we say it's for winter, it was a bit earlier, but it's generally available for sure in this release period. And this is SOQL Query Builder, right? This is a plugin for Visual Studio Code that you can use to build SOQL queries easily, right? It's similar to what we had in Workbench, but now it's fully integrated with Visual Studio Code. To install it, the only thing that you have to do is to update your plugins, the Salesforce extension pack, because it's part of the pack, and there you are going to obtain all the new functionality. By the way, the Salesforce extension pack also includes now functionality for functions. So if you want to get access to that functionality, you will have to update the extension pack plugin as well. I briefly talked about this to explain how to work with functions, right? There is this CLI Unification that is happening. The functions part is generally available with functions, right? We are going to be able to configure, deploy, take a look at our environments, etc. with the SF executable. in the CLI, and future releases are going to support much more, like MuleSoft, Heroku, and the regular SFDX commands. If you want to know more about functions or about these CLI and tooling updates, there was an episode at Dreamforce, which is this one here, that was also very interesting and in which all of these things were demoed. And finally, I forgot I had another topic, which is platform events and change data capture, right? I include this topic because there is a pilot for platform events that I think it's also interesting. With this pilot, what you are going to be able is to define filters, like in the same way that you define formula fields, for instance, you are going to be able to define filters, right, in your organization for platform event channels, in a way in which you filter out the messages that are received in this channel. So if I just want to receive messages which city is San Francisco and amount is bigger than 10.50, etc., I can apply that filter into my channel and get the messages filtered out, so that I don't receive like hundreds and hundreds of messages, just the ones that I'm interested in. And this is a pilot that, again, is a closed pilot, and you need to talk to your account manager to be part of the pilot. These are the links to the developer keynote at Dreamforce and the release readiness live for developers. I have been mentioning these two videos the whole presentation because in those two videos were really where we did the main announcements, right, for this release and from Dreamforce. And if you haven't taken a look at them, I recommend you to do so, because you are going to find nice demos and you are going to find all these features that I have mentioned today. And with that, we have arrived to the end of the presentation. If you don't follow us, you can do that on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can also follow our developer site built with Lightning Web Runtime, remember? And that's all. Thank you so much. Let me know if you have any more questions. If you have questions later, you can always reach out to me in my networks, and I will be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Alva.
You're welcome.
All right.
As always, the session was very helpful.
I hope so. I know that going feature by feature can be a bit boring, because it's like, and this feature, and this feature, and this feature. But I think in this case, it gives context of what Salesforce is doing, what's coming, and the roadmap for developers. For me, it's really helpful to prepare these kind of sessions because I see the full picture myself. So I hope that it has the same effect on you.
And I must say, Alva, you have really planned it well, because it's exactly added the time before you wanted to end it. So presentation was very much precise, I would say. So
Thank
really
you.
appreciate.
Thank you.
All right, so time for question and answers. Guys, this is your opportunity. So
Nobody, or what? Harsha, you wanna ask something?
No, I think whilst people are thinking of questions to ask, I'm not going to ask any questions, because I'm not a developer, but as a consultant, I need to be up to date with some of the tools that developers. I need to keep track of what you're up to, basically. Albert, just thank you very, very much, because I was able to gain some insights. I was really interested in the function stuff that's generally available, so that's given me some insights. It's fair to say that Salesforce, sometimes I feel frustrated on the admin side, but the development the investment in developer tooling and making it broader and easier to access other technologies seems to be continuing unabated. Would you say that's correct, Albert?
Yeah, I totally agree. If you take a look at the functions slide here, one of the main benefits is that we are able to expand our talent pool by incorporating developers that are able to code in Java or in Node. We also gave a step towards standards with Lightning Web Components and JavaScript, and I think that we are doing the same with backend, right? I don't think that Apex is going to disappear though, but I think there is room for both things, right? And the more that we can do, the better.
And do you suggest that wherever it is heavy calculation, as of now, we should start moving to functions?
No. There is. I don't have a slide here because I didn't want to just talk about functions during the presentation. But there is a slide that my teammates are presenting in sessions that are fully centered on functions, in which we explain the use cases in which you we recommend you to use functions. By default, if your application logic is running fine in Apex, that's perfectly fine. You don't need to move into functions. However, if you have a process in which you need to process large data, for instance, the one that we saw that computes the distance between the nodes and so on, and you are not able to run that process in Apex, then you can use the power of functions for that. Or if you need a process that needs to scale, because at a certain point there are going to be many concurrent requests and you need that to scale, I don't know if it's up or out, but in the number of nodes, that are executing that process, then it's also recommended to implement that process with functions because you have that elastic scale, right? The other use case is to just write the functions in a language that is different from Apex. But I wouldn't recommend to start moving your Apex to functions, because obviously Apex is running on the core platform, although functions also run in the Salesforce trusted boundary, but the other one, is running like in the core infrastructure, and if they are running fine, that's perfectly fine to continue working with them and continue writing code in Apex.
Yeah, so I will come to one question based on this. So these functions, how will be they supporting the governor limits of Salesforce, because as it will be outside the system?
Yeah, exactly. So these are out of governor limits. There will be other limits.
Okay.
But much like loose than the ones in Salesforce, because they run in a different infrastructure that is able to auto scale and that is prepared for those intensive operation and those operations that need like many concurrent nodes working at the same time, right?
Yeah.
I've got a supplementary question, if I may. One of the questions, someone's already asked, should we be converting over from Apex to functions? If we keep the core Apex, then there's no additional cost. If we move to functions, then there will be additional costs. So if I've understood correctly and haven't merged 3 different presentations that you've done, but you're not a developer.
Functions will have a cost.
Yeah.
So functions are there to help you with the use cases in which using Apex is not enough or doesn't make sense, right? But functions will have a cost, because bear in mind that functions are running in a new infrastructure that is more complete and more complex, and they will have a cost.
Cool, no, I get it. It means that consultants actually need to be aware of these different things, because there'll be an impact to the customer when they get the bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it will come back to us, not to the developer.
You have to sign up for functions in a contract.
Right.
So people will definitely be aware.
Got you. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
And Alba, while explaining the function, you explained that we can also log the events in Salesforce, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so where exactly we can trace all those things in debugs or?
Yeah, when you use the logger class, let me see if I have the function open here. No. This one. The logger lets you log into Salesforce, right? What the function is doing. And I think, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that this will appear like in the debug logs, but with a different like trace category or whatever.
Okay. All right.
Regarding that Locker services thing, is it available for this all the editions, meaning especially free developer account as well?
If the
LWC
OR,
thing?
yeah, if the OR is Winter 22, it's been upgraded to Winter 22. Yes.
Okay, that's perfect.
So looks like, Romit, you want to test everything in the free developer account as soon as it's available, which is good.
Yeah, that's the way we can learn.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Cool. If we don't have any questions or anything else to discuss, then we can call it off. And yeah, if you have any questions, then reach out to Alba directly or via us.
Yeah, thank you so much, all of you, for attending, and have a good rest of your day.